Hi, it's Rich Forney from the Unstoppable Agent podcast, and welcome back from hopefully an amazing holiday season, and hopefully you enjoyed some time with family, you're recharged and ready for the year. I just want to give a quick intro to today's podcast, and today's podcast is a little different from what we usually focus on. And I wanted to start off the year with a little bit of a different focus because there are so many people around the world who are in a very challenged situation. And today we're going to be sharing a podcast interview that I did with Shae Invidiata. The Invidiata brand in real estate is synonymous with real estate professionalism and excellence throughout Canada and in the world. But in today's podcast, Shae Invidiata is going to be sharing some of her work that she has done in the human trafficking world. Now, Shae founded a not-for-profit organization called Freedom in 2010. It's one of Canada's leading stakeholders in the anti-human trafficking movement. Now, this is a very serious, very important problem globally, and I'm personally asking you to take the time to listen and to perhaps make a decision to join Shae in her mission to help those people, mainly women, who are being abused and trafficked throughout the world. So please listen to this podcast in its entirety and reach out to Shae or myself afterwards with questions around how you can participate in helping these women around the world gain some freedom. Thanks again, and hopefully you enjoy the podcast.
Have you ever wondered why some real estate agents perform at ultra high levels every single year? Welcome to the Unstoppable Agent Podcast with your host, Richard Fournier. Each week, we interview real estate agents from around the world who are constantly ranked in the top 1% of the real estate industry. My mission, share with you their best strategies so that you can create your own peak results as a real estate agent. It's time to become unstoppable.
Well, hello and welcome back to this awesome podcast about restarting your life. And I'm very excited to have with us today Shae Invidiata. Shae, welcome to our podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
You know, I'm excited to have you here. You've had such an interesting life. And of course, this podcast is all about what it takes to restart your life, restart your business, and restart your health. And, you know, as we were chatting before we started recording this, performance in any part of someone's life, those skills transfer to every part of life. They transfer to every part of business. So maybe we can just start a little bit around who you are today and where have you come from. I know you're currently living in Costa Rica, which is really annoying for the majority of us who are living in Canada. But maybe you can start a little bit with just a little bit of your background and some of the experiences you've had in because you started in real estate. I mean, it was a big part of your life for a really long time. I'm part of one of the biggest real estate teams in the world. And so maybe we can start there.
Well, it's a great place to start. I was born into real estate. So, you know, I just turned 38 in December. And so, yeah, you know, I grew up in the industry around buying and selling homes and watching the ups and downs of the markets. Like I was born in the 80s. So I heard all of those conversations around when interest rates hit almost 10% higher than where we're at right now. Right. I grew up in this entrepreneurial home and really watched my father, you know, he's first generation in real estate, and watched my dad build something out of nothing, and how that was possible. And so from a young age, it was really instilled in me that I could do anything I wanted, that anything I put my mind to was possible. And when you're a kid, you don't know anything different than what somebody is telling you, right? That mind is so precious and absorbs that. And so I grew up with this mindset and belief. And I also watched how both my parents, it was a really big part of our family ethos, was to give back. That was a really big pillar in our family. And so as I grew up in business, I also grew up in philanthropy, and me developing my own self as a young person, really believing that we didn't have to wait till we were out of school or university or college, maybe be in debt, then hopefully maybe find a partner, get married and have kids, have your career, and then start giving back, which is what a lot of people do. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I really had this desire to be able to change the world as I was growing up. And I kind of created this motto for myself around making money with a purpose. So purpose-driven business. And so in my teenage years, I worked in orphanages in Venezuela, and then it brought me to Hawaii, where I started my university education. And it's a longer story, which if you want to chat about that, we can, but it's where my whole journey in fighting human trafficking was birthed. And that was in 2003. And in 2010, I founded a nonprofit organization to fight human trafficking in Canada. And we are still today one of the most authoritative voices on the issue of human trafficking. We've helped to amend the criminal code 3 times in Canada. We're a stakeholder to the federal government, the provincial government of Ontario, and the government of Toronto. And so that brings us into my 20s, really, when I founded Freedom, and I had just gotten my real estate license. So now, having grown up in the industry, I was now applying all of the things that I had seen. Obviously, there's still a plethora more to learn, right? Just because you grow up, and it does not mean you know everything by any means. So, but that's when I started going out into the field and working alongside of my dad. And so these kind of simultaneously grew side by side, my nonprofit organization and doing real estate at the same time. And then still kind of figuring out who Shae was in between then, and different passions that I had, and health and wellness became a huge factor for me in that, and still is today. So I would say those are kind of my main 3 silos in a very condensed answer.
But it's hard to condense your whole life, right?
It is, yes.
Like a few sentences.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about the human trafficking, and I want to highlight that for a few minutes, because I think it's a very important conversation. I know it's near and dear to your heart. So if you don't mind maybe sharing with our audience, how did you decide to get involved with that? What was the catalyst for this to occur?
Yeah. Sometimes, charities or giving back, that type of work, or even things that we donate to, right? Most people, it's something that they are drawn to, right. And then they become passionate about it, whether they've had a personal experience, or, they've seen something firsthand. And in this scenario, I really felt that human trafficking found me, and I was very much, I was exposed to what was going on. I was living in Hawaii. I mentioned, I started my university education there in 2003. Yeah. And if you've been to Waikiki, as I'm sure many of your audience has, they'll know that in Waikiki, there's 3 main roads that parallel the ocean. And the middle road is known as Kuhio Avenue. And if you stay there long enough, it's commonly known as Candy Lane. And this is where the girls would walk at night, which is called the track. And that's where my dorm was. We were in a hotel, and half operated as a hotel, the other half operated as the dorm. And I would see all kinds of things, from girls going in and out, pimps going in and out. And at that time, did I understand that it was a pimp? I think I did. I mean, I knew like when the girls were being watched. But I saw this firsthand, and I was 18 years old, and I would see girls that were much younger looking than me, 13, 14, 15. And we all know that if a 14-year-old puts on a pair of mom's high heels and puts on red lipstick, a 14-year-old, a 13-year-old can very easily look like 19, 20, 21, 22. And what I wanted to understand at that time was, why would a girl choose to do this? And it is a much longer story, but over 2.5 years, I started to engage with these girls, some of them young women, and learning their stories around the forced abortions, the forced augmentation procedures, the boyfriends that promised them a dream vacation of a lifetime, and it turned into their literal worst living nightmare, to the modeling agencies that didn't exist on the island, when they got there. All different kinds of stories. And what I started to learn is that the word prostitute, that we equate so much with the word choice, is widely misrepresented, and that the more accurate word to be using is prostituted. And when you learn that word, you start to learn the elements around exploitation, coercion, being forced, living off of the avails, meaning living off of their body or the work that they are doing, because human trafficking is just not limited to sexual exploitation. It includes forced labor, there's chattel bondage, there's debt bondage, there's organ trafficking, there's many different forms. In Canada and the United States, the two most common are sexual exploitation and forced labor. So that's naturally what we associate kind of human trafficking with in Canada and the United States. And for me at that time, what was really hard to understand was, being Canadian, living in the United States, arguably two of the most free nations on the planet, I was going, where is our world on this issue? Like, nobody's talking about this. And at that time, I still hadn't learned this huge word called human trafficking. Right. This was probably around 2005, 2006 at this point. And it wasn't until I actually moved off of the island and I moved to Vancouver, BC. And anybody who's been to the downtown east side will say it's rampant with prostitution. And, I argue that, again, there's a lot of those women and girls there that it's not prostitution, that they're being forced into prostitution. But this is when I learned this word, human trafficking. And I was like, oh my God, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry that happens every year. And where's our world on this? And so I vowed back then, I had no clue that freedom would exist one day. In 2010 is when we founded. I had no clue that we'd become a nonprofit and going on to doing some of the work we did. But I made a promise to those girls that as long as I had a voice, I would amplify theirs. I really don't like, you'll hear in the charity world or fundraisers, being a voice for the voiceless. It's very kitschy, but I really don't agree with it. I believe we all have a voice, and theirs had just been silenced. And so I wanted to amplify that for them. And it snowballed, and it amounted into something beyond really like my wildest, I don't want to say dreams, but my imagination. Like, I really did not think that we would grow into what we did today, being in Canada.
Thank you for doing what you do. It's super interesting, and I'm sure our audience will want to learn a little bit more. Let me ask you a question about these victims, really, these beautiful people who are victimized. Are they? I'm hoping there are some stories of people who have been able to get out of these situations and to restart part of their life again. And how does your organization support these victims and restarting a life if they get the opportunity to do so?
Sure. And it's a great question. It's multi-level. It's complex to answer. So I will try to share this in.
And I know you weren't expecting the question. This is completely off the cuff to our audience. And because I'm learning as I go around this topic, and I think this is maybe a multi episode interview. And
that's just it. I'm like, we could talk the rest of time on just this topic. So, but simply, so freedom back then and still today, our mandate is to focus on all things to do with preventative measures to fighting human trafficking. So this is awareness campaigns, legislation, speaking engagements, fundraisers. So like the preventative, the awareness component, because that was the biggest gap we had when I looked at what was going on in Canada in 2009. There was a handful of organizations at that time doing what we call frontline work, meaning they are the ones that are receiving victims of trafficking after they've been rescued, and they are working on the rehabilitation process. Many of them do great work. Not a lot of them are very good at asking for money and fundraising. So that became one of our strong points, was let us do that for you, and you continue to do what you do best. Because Shae's not a trauma counselor. I am not a therapist. I'm not going to become one. That's a whole different lifetime, really. So rather than us reinvent the wheel, we said, let's partner with frontline organizations that are doing the best work across Canada, and we will support the funding through funding. And so that's what we did back then, and we still do that today. So for example, in Toronto, the Covenant House is one of our main partners that we fund to. Another one in Toronto is Aurora House, and they take in victims of human trafficking, girls anywhere between ages of 13, 12. They'll take them as young as they come, all the way up to about 22. And there's 3 different stages of rehabilitation, from immediate crisis to short-term and long-term housing. And of course, there's different programs that you need to complete to get to that next phase. There's a lot of course, you can imagine mental trauma that happens. There's a lot of psychological trauma that happens, physical trauma. There's a series of relapsing around addiction. A lot of the girls are given very intense drugs to make them not just comply, but also make them not be able to easily escape, right? If you don't know where you're going to get your next fix from, and the person who's hurting you is the one who's feeding you, you unfortunately, you stay close. So that's a big tactic around that. So when the rehabilitation process starts, it can be a very, very long journey. But when I first started, had very little resources from a government support standpoint to housing. And, very happy to say that we have a lot more that we do now than we did almost 13 years ago. We still don't have enough, but we have come a long way in Canada, with, like I said, still room for much more improvement. But there are amazing stories of girls who are being rescued, and even young boys too. Boys are not immune to this. They do fall victim as well. And there's some beautiful life-changing stories that have come out of it. And some of them have gone on to become UN representatives, speakers on the issues of human trafficking, and starting their own organizations that have helped to keep rescuing victims of trafficking, to other girls that they've started their own businesses quietly. There's a fine line between wanting to share your story to help other women, but every time you tell your story, it can re-victimize that person, and everybody's different. So everybody is going to have a different response and feel to that. But, not every survivor is wanting to necessarily get up and speak about what happened to them. And there might come a time and day for that, but some of them are what I call these silent heroes, where they're just doing their thing.
Yeah. This may sound like a very naive question, but it's not something that I think we are, exposed to day to day in a typical family unit.
Sure.
And I don't see it talked about very much out there in the news, and I don't see it. I don't see these conversations being had en masse. Mm-hmm. And so for some of our listeners who have children, is there common ways that parents can look out for their kids that where maybe it's the wrong language, Shae, but they're groomed in a way? Like, what can parents do to look out for their children and to protect them from these situations?
Yeah, it's a very important question. A I encourage parents, because some parents, again, this is a very ugly topic. It can be very scary. And some people, not just parents, have the mindset of, well, I don't want to talk to them about it because then I put that idea in their head, and yet I firmly believe that knowledge is very empowering. And it's not just, and this is a Tony Robbins line, it's not just about having that knowledge, but it's applying that knowledge that actually makes it powerful. And that's Tony's line, right? He's like, having knowledge is nothing. Like, it's how you apply it that makes the difference. And it's true. So being able to give a child the understanding, which for me is the application in this conversation, and allowing a child to feel that they can come to you, not to be in trouble, not to be ashamed, not to be embarrassed, that they're afraid. A parent really needs to create this safe space that if the child knows what to look for, that they can come and say, hey, mom, dad, I could be wrong, but I think this is maybe what you were talking about via Snapchat, via Tinder, via, Facebook. There's all of the different social media platforms today are very much utilized for the grooming process and the luring process for a lot of young people. And I say to parents, if your child has access to a tablet, smart anything, or they have access to the internet, you need to be speaking to your child about this, because if you don't, somebody else will. And it might not be the person that you want to be speaking to your kid. And the next biggest thing I encourage parents to really, really not be naive to is that it can happen to your child. I've spoken to thousands of young people from even the youngest actually was grade 5s, but typically I speak to junior high, so 7 and 8s, and then all the way through high school, even in university. But the majority of the kids that I speak to are high school students. And every single time I speak in a high school, whether it is a public school, whether it's a all private boys school, all private girls school, I have at least 1 or 2 kids coming up to me saying, I did not know that there was a word called human trafficking, but I think this is happening to one of my friends. So it does not matter. It does not matter if you come from a broken home or you are in a less fortunate community. It doesn't matter your demographic or the money situation. Your child, as long as there's vulnerability involved, obviously, if there's poverty involved as well, that makes you the most prone. That's what I always say. Wherever you can eliminate poverty and vulnerability from a situation, you're going to be able to fight human trafficking. But if a kid is in high school or in school and they are vulnerable or they are insecure, they could become susceptible to being a victim of trafficking. And so that's my biggest message to parents is don't think that it couldn't happen to your child, because it absolutely could. And it is probably happening to somebody's child that you may know and not realize it. And that's the scariest part. Some of these victims go home and sleep in their house and they are being trafficked. They are being sold and pimped out during the day, or, even in the evening, telling their parents they're studying at a friend's house, they're going to the movie theaters, they've got a job at McDonald's or whatever it is. And if parents, it's not to be hounding your child, right? Like, that's not healthy for them either. And it's just going to cause your child to pull away. But if you aren't actively involved and aware of the unseen circumstances that can happen, right? Because when I started first around human trafficking, we really didn't have social media. Like, that was like Facebook was just kind of new on the market. And the big hub spots were at the malls and guys approaching young females at malls, at coffee shops, and at movie theaters, especially. Movie theaters and the malls were the 2 biggest ones. Now it's, if you have a phone, it like that's anywhere. So as a parent, you need to be having that communication of telling a child what to be looking for that could be indicators. And like I said, empowering your child to make good decisions. And not feeling like they can't come to their parent to say, hey, this might be happening.
I hear what you're saying, and as a parent with three daughters, we have heard stories around some of these situations, and I believe you in such a strong way that I think that a lot of parents are very naive around what their kids are doing, especially with apps like Snapchat, where, even my own children, I've heard them have conversations with boys who they don't even know from other towns, and they're having conversations, and it's a free for all, and it's very difficult to keep control of it. Even one of my kids had a burner phone, and we didn't know about the burner phone.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
and my kid,
yeah.
Right. And
Well, you're that exact prime example where I'm talking about. You can grow up in a good home, good family environment, loving environment, and you guys are very comfortable in life, not worrying about food on the table, and just something as simple as that, and that's like a very prime example. So I appreciate you sharing that and being vulnerable to your audience and telling them that, because
I won't say which one, because one of my kids might be listening to this podcast, but this podcast is really geared towards restarting your life, restarting your business, restarting your health, really giving yourself another shot at life, right? Because every single morning you get another opportunity. But the truth is, there are a lot of people, specifically women, who are not getting another opportunity. They're not getting an opportunity to restart their day, right? They're living in squalor, and they're being aggressively hurt. So they don't get the opportunity to restart their life unless they're saved, unless we save them from a situation. That's some really great information. And if someone wanted to join you, and I don't want to say it's a crusade, but it kind of is in a lot of ways. You're there to save some people. What can they do to partner with you to make a difference?
And thanks for asking that. Again, it's why Free Them was founded, was around the awareness and education component. I think we turn 13 in January 2023, and it's wild to me that still there's so many people that don't know what human trafficking is, and it's not even that they don't even know what it is, but then they don't believe that it's happening in Canada. So we've done so much work, and yet we still have so much work to go. And it means people like yourself and other citizens that need to get involved. And, I encourage you to follow us on Instagram. We're free_them_. You can go to our website, freethem.ca. Get plugged in, join our newsletter. There's tons of resources on our website around the basics of 101 stuff, around what is human trafficking, what are the signs, what's it look like, where you can even report. I always say to people, if you see something, say something. And even if it amounts to nothing, you could just be saving a life. If your gut is very strong, and those times you walk by and you're like, well, that seems off. That seems something's not right there. 9 times out of 10, I'm going to go even more to say 9.999 times out of 10, you're probably right. Something is probably off. And if you don't want to call 911, totally understand that, because you might personally not want to get involved, but you can call Crime Stoppers. It's anonymous. And when I was in high school, I always thought of them like Ghostbusters. It's like, is that really a thing? But it really is a thing, and it really works. And you'd be blown away around the amount of victims that have been located and rescued because of people calling in their tips. So it really does work. The Crime Stoppers number is on our website. On any page you're on, it's at the bottom, so you can go there. Just stay connected. That way, when we have events, how you can support online campaigns that we do. And, I'll say one last thing just on this. For a very long time, it's been an upward hill battle to have these conversations with people. And one of the silver linings for myself personally in 2020 that came about through the whole thing that's happened in our world was the topic of human trafficking, right? There's a lot of stuff that exploded on the internet, good, bad. Some people, very on the conspiracy mindset, like human trafficking is not happening, which, that's not what this conversation is going to be about. And I have very strong views on all of that. But my point to a parent is it happened all online. It was all over social media, adrenochrome, human trafficking, like all of this was online. And we went from a huge, not just Canada and the United States, but a world that was very quiet on this topic to all of a sudden it exploding. And this is a really fantastic opportunity as a parent to say, hey, remember, what you were seeing in 2020 and even trickling into 2021. We should talk about this, and if you go on our website, right on our homepage, freedom.ca, we did a fantastic PSA, which just means like it's a public service announcement video this past July for World Day Against Human Trafficking in 2022. And it's a great video. Show it to your kids. There's news footage that we included in this. Like, this is real and it's happening. So I'd say, that's your first steps, is just getting empowered through information. You don't need to know everything. I know, that's fine. But you just need to know a few things. Spend an hour or two on our website, join us on Freedom, on Instagram, and start having those conversations with your kids, because they've already been exposed to it because of what happened in 2020. So it's the perfect segue to have some of these uncomfortable conversations, but it'll save you from having horrific conversations in the future. So,
Shae, I can't tell you how excited I am to have you on to talk about this. And I want to have you back to discuss the rest of your life. But I think at this point, this particular conversation should be shared front and center. And I'm going to do everything I can to promote this podcast out there, and try to get you some more traffic. I appreciate you, and I'm sure there are a lot of people who appreciate what you're doing for them, and even they don't even know what you're doing at this point. So thank you for being a stellar human being, and I can't wait to talk to you again.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to today's show. If you like what you've heard and you're interested in creating a quantum leap in your real estate business, here's what I want you to do next. Head over to www.theunstoppableagentprogram.com and book an appointment to speak with our team. We'll get on a Zoom call with you for about 30 minutes and get you crystal clear on 3 things. Number 1, what do you really want out of your life and your business? Number 2, what is not working for you today? And number 3, the exact mindset strategy you should be using to create massive change in these areas. Remember, creating massive, consistent results in your real estate business does not happen by itself. You need expert guidance to make it happen. We're helping clients all over the world create peak results in their real estate business. To see if we can help you do the same, head over to www.theunstoppableagentprogram.com. We'll chat soon.